Welcome to the Exit Strategy, your no bullshit guide to divorce with the experienced attorneys from New Direction Family Law. Unfiltered discussions to help you move from victim to victorious and from bitter to better.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sarah Hink, one of the attorneys at New Direction Family Law. I have my sidekick, Ava Jeanette, who is here today in place of Elizabeth Stevenson. Hey, Ava.
Hi there.
And then we have our guest for the podcast today, attorney Matt McGonigal. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And you might, listeners, recognize his last name, that his other half is... Better half. The better half, Kelly McGonigal, is an attorney with us at New Direction Family Law. She has been on the podcast before.
Right. I think I listened to her episode.
You did listen to her episode?
Yeah.
Oh, such a good husband. He is one of the best. We're lucky to have him in the New Direction Family Law fam.
Awesome.
So tell us a bit about your practice as an attorney.
So
you don't do family law.
I do not do, well, maybe on the front end. Maybe I do too much. I don't know. I board certified estate planning probate law. And so I do a lot of trusts and wills and estate administration on the back end and work with a lot of clients with small businesses, and that requires operating agreements, shareholders agreements.
We have you as a guest on today to talk a little bit about business creation and what to think about as far as protecting your business as we go down the road, and if you're married or have a spouse. And then also, I mean, as you mentioned with estates, you kind of need to do the same thing as well.
That's right.
Because there's protections in life.
Right.
You don't know if you're going to stay married together forever. So if someone comes to you and they want to, they have a business, they have assets, they're coming to you, need a, protective or some kind of order, not an order, but an agreement for their business. What do you tell them as far as marriage situations and what to put in there?
I think it depends, like any lawyer, it depends.
Yeah.
So it depends on what kind of business you have. I mean, if you have an LLC, then you're talking operating agreement. If you have a corporation, which are fewer and far between, you have shareholders agreement. That usually is something that you were going to look at entering into. So I think it depends on what you have, and what you are going to do is different in those two agreements. Operating agreements are usually a little more flexible than shareholders agreements, but that's my first step. I'm looking at, do we need to do one of those if you have other owners? If it's just a single member deal, then it's not quite as cumbersome.
It does get complicated when there's other shareholders and other owners of the business. And I think that's where I've seen in reviewing people's business contracts, their formation agreements, what have you, that there might be language about divorces and what could happen. Right. So what have you seen as far as languages?
Generally speaking, that's when you've got your buy-sell provisions that are, triggered upon a divorce or death or some triggering event like that. So that's usually where you're getting into, okay, there's other owners, we got to protect other owners in this business, and if we get a divorce, then what's going to happen to these shares, and there may be a triggering provision in there that says, if you get a divorce, and here's the provisions on how you value the shares or the interest. Yeah,
and that's really to protect the people in the business who are not getting the divorce.
That's right. Or the underlying, employees of the business that are going to be impacted by some, spat on the owner level. Yeah,
just a little spat over there. And how does that frustrate the business? And I know that me and Ava probably see more of that part of it than you do, because you're advising people on the start of it, like, hey, you need this operating agreement, shareholders agreement.
That's right.
Let's maybe put a provision in there about divorce triggering someone's buy-sell portion, because it might frustrate the business. And some people are like, oh, I never thought about that. But I see it because we file for equitable distribution. And if a business is part of the assets, then we can bring in the business to the party, to the litigation divorce party in court.
I'm interested to hear what you have to say about it, because I have a client that for the last 10 years has been in an equitable distribution matter, and we represent the business side of it, and it's a mess. I mean, it's constantly bringing in the employees on, subpoenas and records and all those other things.
Yeah, because you want to get to the bottom of how much does that business make? What's the value of that business? Because in North Carolina, I mean, if you have a business that you started during the marriage, and you're, if you're the sole owner or not, whatever portion of the business that you have is marital property if it started during the marriage. Right. So then the spouse that's not in the business wants to know, hey, well, how much is that business worth? What's my cut of that business? I'm going to get half of that portion of whatever you have of that business. Right. So then we want, financial statements of the business, tax returns of the business. We're trying to value it. If it's a large business, you're going to have some attorneys that are representing the business come to court. I've been to depositions about affairs, bringing in the third party affair partner, and the business people are there. I'm like, what are these business attorneys doing here? They're just getting paid to like listen to the good stuff, right? Yep. But it can get really messy with businesses, and I think that's what owners want to protect.
Yeah, I think the only ones I've been involved in was to try to keep the business out of the court process and say, okay, what can we give you to just leave us alone?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so what do you recommend? Do you recommend they put those like triggering events in there?
I mean, I think that if you have unrelated business partners, yes, I think it makes a whole lot of sense to have those provisions in there. And whether they trigger them or not, kind of depends on the process on your side. I mean, if you are, as part of the distribution, if the spouse is getting those shares or getting some ownership interest, well, then yeah, you want to trigger that because you don't want that person in the business.
No, you don't. Yeah. And I've also seen some shareholder agreements, operating agreements that say that triggers it, or if the spouse will sign a waiver.
Right.
So that could be protect you as well. Like,
yeah,
okay,
exactly.
my spouse will just sign this waiver saying that they don't want any of these shareholder or the shares or the assets in the business, and they're just going to sign that away.
That's right.
Which is good. And they might do that in the middle of their marriage when everything's hunky-dory and happy and just sign the waiver.
That's right.
And then the other spouse, the one who signed it, 20 years later and they're getting divorced, may regret that.
That's right. Yeah, we've done, I mean, we do some premarital agreements, and we've done post-nup agreements like that just for specific businesses saying, I'm out of this one. So,
protect the business for sure. And as far as trust are concerned, is that something that would protect someone from getting involved into litigation with a divorce?
Again, it depends.
Yeah.
So North Carolina is not a self-settled trust state. So you can't create a trust for yourself, put your own business in it, and then expect it to be protected from your creditors. So that you can't do it that way.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah.
I feel like trust and business, how they're combined, and it's just really confusing for people, including myself.
A trust is just an entity like anything else. I mean, so just think of it as an owner of any other entity, just like you or a LLC can own another entity. So once you create it, you can assign your interest in that business to the trust. And so we do a lot of that on an estate planning side, where we do a revocable trust and it'll own the business and it escapes probate, and that's normal planning. The irrevocable trusts are where you're talking about some potential asset protection from creditors, but you can't do it yourself. You got to have somebody else create it for you, and then
a trustee,
a grantor. Yeah, trustee is the person that's actually going to be in control of the trust.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you would need to have multiple owners of the business, or multiple?
No. So normally, if you want it to be creditor protected, this is something like, if I died, I'm setting up a trust for my children. That trust is then creditor protected, and so their spouses aren't going to be able to get those assets in that trust.
Gotcha.
So there's only one trustee. The trustee can be an owner of a business or the sole owner of a business.
Okay, and so you can put businesses in the trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can put real property in the trust.
Absolutely.
You can put all the money in the trust.
Absolutely.
And that's
anything.
Typically recommended, correct? Like you said?
Absolutely. Very much so.
So why do people choose not to put assets in a trust? Just they don't take the step to do it, or
that, and maybe they don't have those assets. So a lot of people have just like a 401k. That's not really a trust asset.
Right.
It's hard to do in a trust. So that's not something that somebody needs a trust for.
Yeah.
But if they have an LLC or a corporation, I'm giving them a trust.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the smart thing to do.
Yes.
And if you're in the middle of a marriage, even if things are happy and you have your own business, it's probably smart to take those steps.
Yes.
And speak to an attorney about a post-nup.
Yes.
You've done post-nups. We do post-nups. And a lot of times I see it when people they've separated for a little bit and might be reconciling. Right. But it's also just one of those safety provisions for your business.
I think that's true. I think especially if you have other outside parties that are members or shareholders with you, where you have other unrelated interests that are involved. If it's just your business, then it's just between the two of you. You can figure that out.
Yeah. So if your partner in your business has a wife that you can't stand,
exactly.
be like, you know what?
I think we need
to talk about this.
That's right.
That's
exactly right.
And it can be reciprocal.
Yes.
Everyone can do it.
Yes, exactly right.
Sign the waiver.
That's right.
So what other considerations should someone think about when, starting a business and as far as the shareholder agreements and operating agreements?
I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with, tax planning. How do you want your business to be structured from a tax standpoint? How does that impact your significant other in those choices? I think, you deal with divorce, but a concern of mine is, if a client dies, how does that impact their spouse? Do you have an elective share issue that you have to deal with? And so that's some of the planning that try to do on the front end.
You're a one-stop shop for all those
Yes,
issues, which
yes.
is really great because they are all so
Yeah, they're very intertwined.
intertwined.
Yes, very so.
So what happens, and this isn't really divorce related, but if your spouse does die and they have a business, I mean, what generally does happen in that scenario?
It depends on what the will or trust says. You know, if they've disinherited their wife, then there's probably going to be an elective share issue, and then you're going to have a court, issue that you're going to have to address. And if it's as smooth as, I leave everything to my spouse, then that's a easy probate or trust administration, and we just do assignments, and it's all easy.
Well, if say there's 3 people in a business, and then one of the 3 dies, and their spouse gets their share of the business, what tends to happen? Is the spouse usually like, I don't want to be involved, sells it back? Or
if you've done your planning on the front end and you've got a buy-sell, then it gets triggered, and you've got some sort of language in there that says, all right, here's how we're going to value the share, and we're going to buy you out, and here's the terms on 5-year payout over X number, whatever the provisions are. So that's one way to handle it. And if you've not done your planning and now you just have this random spouse in your business, then you got to figure out how to buy her out, or she's just going to sit there and be one
part
of your
of the
owners.
business,
That's right.
get paid. Yeah. And looking at those operating agreements, shareholder agreements, a lot of them look boilerplate, but I mean, that's really important information and language to have in an agreement. What's going to happen?
It's boilerplate if you've done your job right and you make them so that they're boilerplate.
Yeah.
But you can't just go pull one off, LegalZoom or whatever and expect it to hold up.
Yeah. We do not endorse LegalZoom on this podcast.
No, absolutely not.
No, not at all.
Fix more problems from there than I care to.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you can't fix them. That's
right.
the problem
That's
too, right?
That's right.
Like sometimes they're valid and you're like, oh, well, crap. This is a valid agreement that you did and it's terrible.
That's right.
We see that a lot with separation agreements.
All the time.
Yeah.
And then they come back and bite you.
That's right. Always. Yeah. Sometimes you get what you pay for.
I know, for sure. I mean, you got to pick your spouse, and you got to pick your business partners.
Right.
I mean, you never know who you're going to end up with.
That's right.
So they're really like one and the same to think about it. You just want to be physically attracted to your spouse as well. Maybe not so much your business partners.
That's right.
You can help that.
Hi there, it's Cam with New Direction Family Law. And if you find yourself facing or considering separation and divorce, you may realize that determining who gets what property can be one of the more complicated and confusing issues. It's so important that you're represented by an experienced family law attorney who knows marital property law and will advocate for your best interest. New Direction Family Law has a combined 80 years of experience protecting the rights of our clients and their assets. When an amicable arrangement can't be reached, we aggressively advocate, we support, and we educate our clients to achieve the best possible outcomes. When you're ready, schedule an initial consultation by calling 919-719-3470 on our website at newdirectionfamilylaw.com or click the link in the episode description. We've got your assets covered.
What else can we give our listeners about, owning a business and divorce? What issues have you run into, Ava?
I have definitely run into
issues.
Yeah. Well, we had a consult together with some business issues that came up with other owners and family involved. And
a lot of time there's family.
Yeah. Yeah. Business and family does not seem to go super well together all the time.
No, not always. Usually that's where you start getting your problems.
But it happens a lot.
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what I see the majority of in a lot of my business cases, related cases, that there is family involved to some extent. And then things get more messy, like, oh, I can't work with my, in-laws anymore.
Right.
If everyone's actively in the business, if both spouses are actively working in the business and doing something, and they want to figure out a way to keep the business going, keep everyone in the business, even though they're separating and might hate each other, it can get messy.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you got to think about your employees and what's best if the business is going to continue or you just throw in the towel, sell it.
I'm curious. I got one question because I'd never deal with it on the back end. Is so one spouse has a business and you're going through an equitable distribution. Are there in-kind distributions of LLCs or stock that happen, or not usually very often?
Not very often, because if they're not both involved in the business and actively participating in the business, then I don't really see that.
They find a
often.
way to balance it out.
Yeah,
with something
there
else.
should be some more money somewhere else to take from. So it doesn't have to be 50% of every asset that these people own. They could, especially if it's more of a hands-off involvement that the person does have in the business, right? Like they don't even actively do much, but they own shares in the business. It's really just money and dividends that they're receiving.
Exactly.
So it can go that way.
Yeah.
You never know. And you can end up with a portion of it and have to be on the shareholders, board and make decisions. All of a sudden she's up there, he's up there, and everyone just glares. I mean, it's got to be really fun times at the shareholder meetings. Yeah. So you got to be careful who you choose. But if they have questions, if anyone has questions about, estates, planning, trusts, business startups, they can come to you, Matt, right?
That's absolutely right.
And where can they find you?
They can find us at Nairn Winslow and Smithfield and Raleigh.
Yeah. So I know that we'll have that information on the link to it. If Cam was here, she'd tell you exactly how it works when you click on the podcast and look at things. I don't know. There's something out there.
There's a link somewhere.
There's a link somewhere.
I was told.
Involved in the podcast that you can click on it. You can find that.
It'll be in the show notes.
It'll be in the show notes. So simple. There it is.
Thank you.
In the show notes. Thanks, Joe. And of course, Kelly's amazing. Thank you for sharing her with us.
Yes.
We appreciate you.
You can find her obviously with us in our law firm. NewDirectionFamilyLaw.com, of course. And I think she's been really busy with courts. We have Elizabeth in court all this week.
Yep,
Kelly's been in court all this week. So if you're out there and you got a business and you're fighting over it and you're in court, call us up.
Yeah, call them, not me.
Call us. Matt, we'll hear about it at dinner.
Hopefully, if I've been involved, we don't have to call you guys.
There you go. That's
point.
very good advice. Yeah, call Matt first. Always get your ducks in a row at the very start of a business. Get an estate plan.
My partner always says a client cannot call you early enough. You cannot call me too early. So
that's true. Us too.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're smart,
absolutely.
Get a prenup in place before you end up in court fighting over the shares of the business.
Trying to clean it all up. That's right.
Then you got business attorneys listening to the affair stuff, and it's a messy situation.
It's much more costly that way. That's for sure. Yeah.
Ain't that some shit?
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review. You can visit us at newdirectionfamilylaw.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at the exitstrategy_podcast or email us at exitstrategy@newdirectionfamilylaw.com. We'll be back next time with more no bullshit content about life, divorce, parenting, relationships, and everything in between.